Welcome to another episode of Elevated Minis. My name is Cody, and in this video we're going to be painting up Dr. Stormcrow from Zombicide Black Plague. Hey guys, I really appreciate you all for being here and checking out the video. If this is your first time here and you pick up a new technique or two for your miniatures, I really hope you'll consider subscribing and liking the video. It really goes a long way in helping grow this channel and put me on a path to making more videos for you guys. If you're curious how I made the base, I made a separate video for that, which I'll link in the cards in the top right or in the description down below. But with all that out of the way, let's get started. Like I mentioned in my sewer base video, I did a zenithal prime on this guy and wanted to go a little more in depth into what that entails. If you know all about zenithal priming, feel free to go ahead and skip this section, but if you're relatively new to painting, hang around for a bit and hopefully you can learn something. I started with a black primer through the airbrush, but you could totally use a spray can here. I let that dry and went to using a white ink from Daler-Rowney and sprayed in a 45-degree cone around the top of the miniature. If you're using a spray can, I would recommend using a light gray or bone color as opposed to white, simply because white spray can primers tend to leave speckling on the miniature unless you're priming in perfect weather conditions. If you're wondering why I'm using ink, it's because once it dries, it actually dries to a gray due to the opacity of the ink, and I can slowly build up the light values and be more selective about which part of the miniature is brighter. But don't get discouraged if you don't have an airbrush. You can get a very similar result with your spray cans. After the 45-degree angle pass, I went from about a 60-degree cone to directly above the miniature to complete the prime. The reason zenithal priming really helps your painting is because it helps pop out those 3D elements of the miniature that might otherwise be difficult to see. It also allows you to see the different light values that kind of help you paint by numbers in a way by showing you where to place your highlights and shadows. It's also a start in how you achieve some of those awesome glazing techniques, which I'm sure I'll cover at some point, but I'm going to stick with more layering techniques in this video. Moving on to the base coating, I started with using Rhinox Hide for the entirety of the robe, as well as one gauntlet on the arm that's holding up the staff. It probably took 2 or 3 coats to cover nicely, but one of the trickier aspects of this model is where all the different cloth fabrics met and intersect. I'm pretty sure I got it right, but I'll let you guys be the judge. I then went to using Baneblade Brown for the clothes underneath the robe, as well as the plague mask. I used a lot of browns on this guy, so bear with me. I then went to using Stormvermin Fur on the cloak, as well as the freshly nailed rat on the staff. For whatever he has rolled up on his back, I used Loren Forest. It could be a sleeping bag, who knows. All I know is there were a lot of bits to paint on this guy and I had to pick a color. And for the backpack on his back, because where else would it be? I used Mournfang Brown. So this guy has a ton of leather straps going every which way, and I decided to go with XV88 for those, as well as the satchel he has hanging on his side and the handle of whatever that tool is on his belt. I also did the straps on his mask with this color, but I actually didn't really care for it, so you'll see me change this later on. For the quiver holding all of his crossbow bolts and the other bag on his back, I went with Doombull Brown. Reaching for another brown, I used Steel Legion Drab for the crossbow, a couple of the pouches on his belt, as well as the top portion of his staff, being careful to avoid the rat that is pinned up there. I then used Ushabti Bone for the other rolled up bits behind his cloak, the strings on the crossbow, the quills on the bolts, as well as the bit of rope on his staff. And changing it up with some contrast paint, I use Wyldwood Contrast for the handle of the staff, allowing that zenithal prime to show through. For the hands, which are the only exposed flesh on this model, I use Bugman's Glow. I then wanted to base out all the future metal parts, so I'm using Corvus Black, and I used it on the breastplate, the sword, his metal gauntlet, and the metal parts of the tools on his belt, and whatever it is that's tucked away on his back. And for my final base coat, I used Gun Gray over all the parts that I had painted with Corvus Black previously. But if you are curious why I painted it black first, it's just that metallics tend to cover better when used over a black base coat. I then gave Dr. Stormcrow his Agrax Earthshade bath to pop out all the details. Strong Tone from Army Painter would work just as well for this. You want to just slather this over the entire model and let this stuff settle into the recesses. The biggest thing to avoid here is not allowing the wash to pool up on flat surfaces. But if this happens to you, it's no big deal. Just soak up the excess and redistribute it elsewhere on the model or onto a paper towel. And like I said earlier, I wasn't too happy with the leather straps on the Plague Mask because there wasn't enough contrast between the straps and the beak of the mask, so I repainted those with Rhinox Hide. I then took a fine detail brush and painted the lenses of the mask with Pallid Witch Flesh. These lenses are probably some of the smallest I've seen on a model, and I had every intention to do the red to yellow lens effect, but it ended up being more of an orangish yellow, which I was more than happy with anyway. So if you're wondering why I have the red on my palette, that's why. But after doing the lenses white, I basically filtered them out by using Casandora Yellow, which is a yellow-orange wash, and I followed that up with Firedragon Bright in the corner of the lens to complete it. So after the lenses, you could stop if you wanted to, but by spending a little more time with highlighting, you can really make your model stand out. My general approach to highlighting is I typically start from the inside of the model before moving to the outside, and that usually means highlighting all the little bits and straps of the model first. Not saying I don't break this rule ever because I do it shortly, but it's always a starting point. I just find I make less mistakes, and any mistake I do make is much easier to correct. So for example, if I hit the robe while going in for his belt, it's much easier to correct because I haven't done any highlighting or blending work yet. So it's just a matter of grabbing the base color and painting over that mistake. But I started this idea with using Vallejo Model Air Silver on all of the metal edges and little rivets, tools, and all of the little dots on the beak of the helm, which I probably should have base coated with black first to help pop them out more, but it turned out fine in the end. Next, I'm going to be reapplying some base colors while leaving the wash in the shadows and the recesses. This is where you really start to see things popping out of your miniature, and it's probably one of my favorite times while painting. But I'm using XV88 once again on all the leather straps and satchel on his side. It was the same idea here as well with the Baneblade Brown, and I did this on top of the top portion of the beak and all the clothes underneath his robe, as well as the glove on his left hand. I then hit all of the skulls and bones that are scattered everywhere on the miniature with Ushabti Bone, as well as reapplying it to the strings of the crossbow and the staff. Be careful here, just make sure you use like the side of your brush when you're going over the strings, and you'll keep that Agrax Earthshade in the recesses. I also hit all of the bits on his back as well as the feathers on the bolts again. I then went back to Mournfang Brown for the backpack to bring out just those little bit of raised details there. Sorry for not being linear here with the Ushabti Bone, but I hit all of the stitching on his backpack. There's also a little bit on his robe, as well as the leather gauntlet on his left hand. I then did a 50-50 mix of Ushabti Bone and Baneblade Brown to push the light value on the top portion of his mask. I just didn't feel like it was popping out enough for me. And using a super fine tip brush, I use silver to hit all the buckles on his little rolled up pack there. I then went back to Loren Forest to bring back some of that base color again. Working on the cloak now, I made a 50-50 mix of Stormvermin Fur and Flayed One Flesh on the wet palette before using just straight Stormvermin Fur for the edge highlight. I then decided I wanted to give it a little bit of texture, so I started making little slashes all along the edges, and the finer you're able to do this, the better the effect will be. I just went progressively lighter and lighter by adding more and more Flayed One Flesh. Using the same mid-tone that I used on the cloak, I did a quick dry brush on the rat to try to pop out its fur details a bit more. So before this, my camera battery died, but don't worry, you really didn't miss that much. All I did was reapply some Rhinox Hide over all of the raised folds of his robe, leaving the wash in the recesses. But with a fresh camera battery, I moved on to a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Gorthor Brown over those same raised areas of the robe, but leaving some of the Rhinox Hide still visible as well. With layering, you're always leaving a bit of the previous layers showing. I'm going 50-50 on my mixes, but if you want an even smoother transition of color, you could start with more Rhinox Hide in like a 25-75 mix, or even less if you wanted. But hopefully that makes sense and you get the idea. Since his robe is the biggest portion of the model, it doesn't hurt to hit the extreme edges of the folds, and for that I used a 50-50 mix of Gorthor Brown and Baneblade Brown. To highlight all of the skulls and bones, I used a mix of Pallid Witch Flesh and Ushabti Bone. You're probably starting to pick up on my pattern here, but I hit all of the straps on the upper portions as well as the satchel along the bottom right corner with XV88 and Ushabti Bone. I'm doing it again here, but mixing in Steel Legion Drab with the Ushabti Bone for all the pouches and the crossbow and top of the staff. And then a quick little highlight here on the backpack. I just used some Skrag Brown on the most raised edge there of that backpack. I made a 50-50 mix of Doombull Brown and Cadian Fleshtone on the palette that I'll come back to in a second, but I laid down a bit of Doombull Brown on the quiver and pack on his back to bring back some of the base color. I then went to highlighting the edges with the 50-50 mix of those two colors before hitting a few select edges with straight Cadian Fleshtone. I also hit the rat tail with the 50-50 mix as well. To try to bring back some of the wood grain on the staff, I did a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Rakarth Flesh and just kind of dragged the side of my brush along the edge. And to brighten up the rolled up pack on his back, I used a mix of Loren Forest and Deathguard Green, leaving some of that Loren Forest still showing. And for the lone pieces of flesh on this guy, I used Cadian Fleshtone on all the individual fingers, just to pop them out a bit more. I wanted to bring back a little bit of the metallic sheen on his sword, so I just pulled out the original base color of gun gray and just ran it along the edge. And then using one of the newer Citadel paints, I used Runelord Brass, and I just used this on the hilt of the sword. And for my final bit of painting, I used Tamiya Clear Red and a dot of Corvus Black to darken it up. You could use your favorite blood effect here, but I used a crappy brush and dabbed it onto the sword, as well as around the rat a bit, where it looks nailed down, so it looks freshly pinned. And the last thing to do was to take some super glue and pin it down onto the base that you saw me make in my previous video. And that finishes up this model. I truly hope you guys picked up a technique or two and learned one way of how you can tackle the paint job for this guy. If you did, I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking the video. It all helps to grow this channel where I can dedicate more time to deliver content to you guys. But a fair bit of warning, my next video may take a little bit longer than normal to complete, but it's going to be a special one that you won't want to miss. Until next time guys, thanks again.